On the edge of Redlands, long before its citrus groves matured, and long before anyone imagined a grand estate watching over the valley, Prospect Hill stood mostly untouched. The hillside was rugged, sun-bleached, and windswept, a place where travelers rarely lingered, and where the sunset cast long shadows across the empty terrain. Yet, to one woman, this barren rise did not look desolate at all. To Cornelia Hill, one of the early pioneers of the town, the hill seemed to be waiting, almost inviting, someone to shape it into something extraordinary. While others saw dry earth and stubborn rocks, she recognized potential, a vantage point above the young city, a place where architecture could become a statement and where a home could command both attention and admiration. Cornelia was not a person who chose anything casually. She understood the significance of selecting a location that would define not just a personal residence, but also a marker of aspiration in a developing community. At the end of the 19th century, Redlands was transforming from a growing settlement into an enclave of ambition and refinement. The idea of building high on Prospect Hill was, in many ways, an act of confidence, a declaration that the town's future would be shaped by those willing to dream boldly. With this vision in mind, Cornelia began to search for architects capable of translating her ideas into something tangible and timeless. Her choice fell upon the Los Angeles partnership of Oliver Perry Dennis and Lyman Farwell, designers whose work carried the elegance and theatrical flair of European revival styles. At a time when American architecture often borrowed heavily from the grandeur of older continents, Dennis and Farwell understood how to adapt classical influences into structures suited for California's climate and landscape. For Cornelia, they envisioned something intimate yet commanding, a petite château. Not an overwhelming palace that would overpower the hillside, but a graceful residence with the silhouette of a French manor transported into the Californian light. The creamy walls, the turret rising like a watchful tower, and the delicate arches were all conceived to create the impression of a fairy tale landmark gently placed above the citrus groves below. As construction began in 1897, the shape of the future home slowly emerged, its outlines contrasting sharply with the rugged hill around it. Workers carved pathways, laid stone, and erected walls that seemed to transform the land itself. The tower rose first, giving form to the skyline, followed by the sweeping rooflines that framed the house as though it were growing organically from the hill. Neighbors watched with curiosity. A château here? On a hill better known for dust and stubborn shrubs? Yet, as the building took form, it became unmistakable that Redlands was about to gain a symbol of a new era, an architectural gesture that suggested the town was becoming something more than another inland agricultural settlement. Cornelia's home was not merely a residence. It was an announcement that refinement, design, and ambition had arrived. By the time the finishing touches were added, shaped woodwork, stone details, and the final strokes of pale color along the exterior walls, the petite château already looked as though it had been perched on Prospect Hill for generations. It carried that peculiar quality possessed by homes built with clarity of purpose. It felt inevitable, as if the hill had been waiting for precisely this structure and no other. The winds seemed gentler around it, the sunsets more dramatic as the tower cast long, elegant shadows across the terraced slope. And, although Cornelia was the first to live within its walls, the house did not belong only to her. From the moment it stood complete, it belonged to the unfolding story of Redlands, a story still in its earliest chapters. Yet, even as Cornelia settled into her chateau-like residence, the house was poised on the threshold of a much larger destiny. Its true narrative, one shaped by new owners, expanding gardens, shifting eras, and the steady passage of time, had only just begun, waiting for the arrival of the family who would one day give the mansion its enduring name and transform the hilltop from a solitary estate into one of California's most cherished historic landmarks. When Dennis and Farwell first stepped onto Prospect Hill, the contrast between the rough Californian terrain and the refined architectural vision Cornelia Hill described must have seemed almost theatrical. The two architects were accustomed to projects that borrowed heavily from European traditions, but here, standing above groves of citrus trees and dusty roads, the idea of creating a French-inspired château carried an entirely different weight. California, at the turn of the century, was a land of contradictions, frontier practicality mixed with imported elegance. and architects like Dennis and Farwell thrived in those spaces where imagination could reshape expectations. Their partnership had already earned a reputation for designing buildings that blended ornamentation with function, and for Cornelia, they imagined something that would stand apart from anything the region had yet seen. The form they chose was bold, yet delicately scaled. Instead of overwhelming the hill with a massive estate, they crafted a silhouette defined by a tall, conical turret that seemed to draw the eye upward, giving the home an almost storybook quality. The creamy exterior walls softened the bright sunlight of the region, allowing the house to glow gently against the rugged landscape. Rows of arched windows added an airy rhythm to the facade, as if each opening were an invitation for light to enter and transform the interior. These choices were not arbitrary. Dennis and Farwell were deeply familiar with the aesthetics of French Renaissance Revival design, and they knew how to adapt those principles to the Californian climate. High roofs protected the house from heat, thick walls offered insulation, and the architectural detailing served both beauty and resilience. Their understanding of European architectural language allowed them to create a home that felt simultaneously intimate and theatrical. The turret, rising above the main structure, recalled medieval châteaux without the heaviness of stone fortresses, while the window arches softened the structure's profile, giving it the warmth and charm of a countryside manor. The placement of balconies, the symmetry of decorative elements, and the subtle curvature of the entryway all contributed to the impression that this house might have been plucked from a distant province in France and somehow transported to Southern California's hills. And yet, it fit the environment with surprising harmony. The sunlit exterior, the interplay of shadows across the tower, and the way the house overlooked the orange groves below made it feel uniquely suited to Redlands, even as it whispered of Europe. To the architects, the home was more than a project. It was a demonstration of how California could absorb and reinterpret old-world styles. They balanced elegance with practicality, ensuring that each decorative detail served a structural purpose. Even the turret, striking as it was, provided cooling airflow inside the upper rooms. Visitors who approached the residence for the first time often remarked on its unexpected presence. It was not typical Victorian exuberance, nor was it one of the sprawling ranch-style homes common in the region. It was something different, something that suggested travel, taste, and a cultivated eye for the romantic. By the time construction concluded, Prospect Hill bore a new identity. What once had been a solitary rise became a stage for a dwelling that commanded attention without demanding it. Locals began referring to the residence as a petite château, an affectionate nod to its scale and elegance. Even from a distance, the turret caught the sun like a beacon, and the arched windows framed the view of Redlands with cinematic precision. The house seemed to look outward, its design quietly asserting that beauty belonged not only in coastal cities or foreign capitals, but also on a hillside in a young inland town. And though Cornelia Hill's vision shaped every stone, every curve, and every shadow cast at sunset, the Petite Château's journey was only beginning. The home stood completed and proud, waiting for the next chapter, one that would unfold when a pair of Midwestern industrialists, seeking warmth and refuge from harsh winters, set their sights on the hill and forever transformed the destiny of the house now known as Kimberly Crest. By the time 1905 arrived, Prospect Hill's Petite Château had already become a quiet landmark in Redlands, admired by locals but still waiting for the chapter that would define its legacy. Hundreds of miles away, in the very different climate of Wisconsin, John Alfred Kimberly and his wife Helen were living lives shaped by responsibility, industry, and relentless winters. John, one of the co-founders of Kimberly-Clark, had risen from modest beginnings to guide a small paper mill into a rapidly expanding industrial empire. His days were filled with decisions that shaped factories, markets, and livelihoods. But as the years progressed, the cold Midwestern seasons weighed more heavily on him and Helen. Their lives in Neenah were deeply rooted in community and enterprise, yet each passing winter reminded them how harsh the northern climate could be. It was during one of their seasonal escapes to California that the couple first heard about the unusual house perched on Prospect Hill. Redlands was known for its orange groves, warm air, and gentle sunlight that cut sharply through the gloom of Wisconsin winters. Friends in the area mentioned a striking chateau-like residence overlooking the city, elegant, serene, and seemingly designed for someone seeking refuge from the cold. Intrigued, John and Helen decided to see the property for themselves, perhaps expecting another polite tour of a place that might or might not suit their needs. But the moment they reached the crest of the hill, something changed. The view unfurled beneath them in a way that no written description could capture. The petite château rose gracefully from the slope, its turret outlined against the clear California sky. The warm breeze moved through the arches of the windows, carrying with it the scent of citrus trees below. Sunlight reflected softly off the light-colored walls, making the house appear as though it were glowing. For a couple accustomed to the frostbitten stillness of northern winters, the atmosphere felt almost unreal, gentle, inviting, full of possibilities. For John, whose success had always been tied to progress and purposeful decisions, the house presented a rare blend of beauty and practicality. It promised a seasonal retreat where he could reflect, recharge, and continue leading his company without the strain of harsh weather. For Helen, who valued education, art, and thoughtful environments, the home offered a place to cultivate beauty, host gatherings, and surround herself with inspiration. It was not merely a house, it was a space that seemed to respond to each of them individually. They walked through its rooms, studied the light moving across the walls, and understood almost immediately that the château on Prospect Hill was exactly what they had been seeking without knowing it. The decision to purchase the estate came naturally. Wisconsin would remain the center of their business and their community work, but California would become their sanctuary, a place where winter no longer dictated the rhythm of their lives. The contrast between the worlds was stark. Frozen lakes and bustling mills in the north, sunlight and quiet terraces in the south. By choosing this home, they were not abandoning one life for another. They were creating balance. They were carving out a chapter defined not by obligation, but by restoration. And so, in 1905, the Petite Château received its new stewards. The house that once belonged solely to Cornelia Hill was now entrusted to a family whose story stretched across states and industries, bringing with it the energy of a rising American enterprise. Yet, even as the Kimberlys settled into their new winter residence, the house itself seemed to anticipate transformation. Under the vision and care of its new owners, it would evolve far beyond the elegant home it already was, growing into a landmark shaped by artistry, landscape, and the personal dreams of a family who believed that beauty and purpose could share the same foundation. Once the purchase was complete, and the Kimberlys settled into the rhythm of their winter seasons in California, the Petite Château atop Prospect Hill began to change in subtle but meaningful ways. Although the house already carried the elegance and charm envisioned by Cornelia Hill, John and Helen sensed that it was ready for a new identity, one that reflected not only its architecture, but also the role it was about to play in their family's story. They gave the estate a name that would endure far beyond their lifetimes: Kimberly Crest. With that name, the house stepped into a broader narrative, no longer just a beautiful residence on a hill, but the western anchor of a family whose work and influence stretched across the country. Renaming the estate was more than an act of formality. It marked the beginning of the Kimberlys' commitment to shaping the property into a true homestead, one that balanced refinement with comfort and privacy with the warmth of hospitality. For a couple accustomed to the structured demands of industrial leadership, the California retreat offered a freedom that Wisconsin never could. Here, John could find quiet reflection away from the mechanisms of the growing paper empire, while Helen could engage with pursuits that celebrated beauty, culture, and thoughtful living. The new name set the tone for a place defined not just by architecture, but by the aspirations of the people who inhabited it. Inside the home, their influence began to appear in details that preserved the original character while expanding its functionality. They rearranged certain rooms to accommodate gatherings, conversations, and the flow of social life that naturally followed a family of their standing. The main hall, already grand in its proportions, became a welcoming space for winter visitors. The library evolved into a sanctuary for study and quiet contemplation. The flower porch turned into a favorite corner of the house where Helen could arrange seasonal blossoms and enjoy the bright California light. Each adjustment, though modest, brought the house further into alignment with the rhythm of the Kimberly family. What truly set the estate apart, however, was the sense of purpose that settled over it. Unlike many seasonal residences that remained mostly dormant until their owners returned, Kimberly Crest began to function as a second center of familial identity. Letters and gifts traveled back and forth between Wisconsin and California, connecting the landscapes of two very different worlds. Seasonal celebrations found new expression on the hill, with the home serving as a gathering point not only for the Kimberleys themselves, but also for friends, colleagues, and members of the community who admired the couple's presence in Redlands. The estate became a place where stories were exchanged, where ideas were nurtured, and where the family's influence flowed far beyond the polished interior walls. The house also reflected the Kimberleys' belief that a home could embody values. Industry had built their fortune, but education, refinement, and community engagement shaped their character. Kimberly Crest became a space where those ideals were lived, not merely discussed. The serene hillside, the quiet rooms filled with filtered sunlight, and the thoughtful arrangement of spaces all contributed to an environment that seemed to honor both tradition and progress, a balance that John and Helen had cultivated throughout their lives. And yet, even with its newly established name and identity, Kimberly Crest was still incomplete. The house stood proudly against the sky, but the surrounding land remained largely untouched, awaiting a creative touch. Helen, who possessed both a love for horticulture and an eye for artistic harmony, began to imagine how the steep, rugged hillside could be transformed into something that matched the beauty of the home itself. The next transformation would not take place within the walls of the château, but across the slopes that fell away beneath it, a vision that would elevate the estate into a place of extraordinary allure and define its character for generations to come. Stepping inside Kimberly Crest during its early years under the Kimberly family felt like entering a carefully orchestrated world where every surface, texture, and detail served a purpose. The exterior, with its turret and elegant lines, hinted at European influence, but the interior revealed the full depth of Victorian craftsmanship. As guests crossed the threshold, they were welcomed by a main hall defined by warm wood tones and intricate carvings that rose upward in delicate patterns. The hall did not overwhelm. Instead, it introduced visitors to the atmosphere of cultivated comfort that John and Helen believed a home should embody. Light filtered in through decorative glass panels, casting gentle reflections across the polished floors and softening the transition from the bright California sun to the cool, shaded interior. The staircase, a sweeping wooden structure that curled upward toward the second floor, stood as one of the home's most striking features. Its banister, shaped with the precision of a sculptor's hand, guided guests toward the private family areas above, while offering them a moment to appreciate the artistry around them. Walls adorned with patterned Victorian wallpaper framed the space with a sense of sophistication, and the subtle interplay of colors contributed to the calm, inviting atmosphere. This was not a house designed merely to impress. It was crafted to express stability, refinement, and the quiet confidence of a family accustomed to balancing practicality with grace. On the first floor, a series of interconnected rooms unfolded like chapters of a story, each with its own character and purpose. The library served as a refuge for thought and conversation, lined with shelves that held not only books, but the intellectual spirit that defined much of the Kimberly family's life. Guests often gravitated toward this room, drawn by the scent of aged wood and the soft light that slipped through the stained glass, casting patterns reminiscent of a cathedral's quiet morning glow. In the parlor, comfortable seating and carefully chosen decor created a welcoming space for social gatherings, where visiting friends or community members could settle into conversations that carried late into the evening. The dining room embodied the dignity of formal hospitality. Its furnishings, chosen with care, stood as a reflection of the Kimberleys' appreciation for craftsmanship. Here, gatherings were not just meals. They were occasions that blended good company with the ambiance of a space designed to elevate even the simplest interaction. And tucked away, somewhat separated from the more formal rooms, was the flower porch, a unique space that captured Helen's gentle touch. Enclosed in glass, it allowed her to work with blossoms sheltered from the elements while still surrounded by natural light. Arrangements created here later appeared throughout the home, adding life, color, and a sense of continuity between the interior and the natural world beyond. Upstairs, the tone shifted from public elegance to private serenity. Bedrooms opened onto a mezzanine that overlooked the main hall, merging openness with seclusion. The placement of windows ensured that sunlight moved through the rooms in soft arcs throughout the day, illuminating the conservatory that crowned the upper level. This glass-enclosed space was more than an architectural flourish. It allowed the family to enjoy the warmth of the California climate even on cooler winter mornings. The conservatory's presence also echoed the Victorian love for indoor botanical spaces, suggesting a continuity between Helen's interests inside the home and her emerging vision for the gardens outside. Each room, each corridor, each carved detail silently communicated the status and values of the family that lived there. Kimberly Crest was not ostentatious in the way some Gilded Age mansions could be. Instead, it embodied a refined sense of accomplishment. The house projected confidence without boasting, artistry without extravagance, and hospitality without pretense. And as guests moved through the interior, they quickly sensed that the true essence of the estate lay in the harmony between beauty and purpose, a harmony that Helen would soon extend beyond the walls, transforming the grounds into a landscape as expressive and meaningful as the home itself. For all the elegance that filled the rooms of Kimberly Crest, the estate remained incomplete in Helen Kimberly's eyes. The house stood proudly at the top of Prospect Hill, yet the land surrounding it felt untamed, as if waiting for someone capable of seeing more than dry soil and uneven slopes. To most visitors, the rugged hillside was simply the natural edge of the property, a practical boundary that protected the home's privacy. But to Helen, whose appreciation for beauty was woven into every corner of her life, it was an untouched canvas. The same instinct that guided her interest in education, domestic sciences, and the cultivation of purposeful spaces now turned toward the outdoors, where she envisioned something remarkable taking shape. Helen had traveled widely, absorbing European aesthetics with an attentive eye. Gardens in Italy had always left a particular impression on her, their terraced structures, harmonious lines, and the way artistry and nature intertwined without one dominating the other. Unlike English landscapes that celebrated wildness, Italian gardens expressed order through geometry, water, and carefully selected greenery. They were designed not only for beauty, but for contemplation, places where pathways led visitors through spaces that unfolded with deliberate rhythm. Standing atop Prospect Hill, Helen imagined how those principles might transform this Californian slope into something far greater than an ornamental yard. She pictured terraces cascading down the hillside, graceful staircases linking each level, and quiet corners where water reflected the shifting sky. What distinguished Helen's vision was the clarity of her purpose. She did not want a garden merely to beautify the property. She wanted to create a landscape that would echo the character of the home itself. The petite château, with its French-inspired silhouette and romantic detailing, deserved a setting that complemented its elegance. A rugged hillside would not suffice. Instead, she sought a seamless transition between architecture and nature, where the home and its surroundings would appear not as separate elements, but as parts of a single, thoughtful composition. The idea of transforming the hill into an Italian Renaissance garden became, for Helen, an extension of the same artistry she cultivated inside the house. Only now, her medium was earth, stone, and sunlight. As she spent time studying the land, Helen understood the challenges before her. The slope was steep, the soil inconsistent, and the Californian climate far harsher than its European inspiration. Yet these obstacles only deepened her commitment. She saw the potential for resilience in the local environment, recognizing that the fusion of California's brightness with Italian formality could yield a garden unlike anything else in the region. This was not simply landscaping, it was an act of sculpting, shaping nature to echo the refined spirit of the home while embracing the warmth and openness of Redlands. But Helen also knew she would need help to bring her vision to life, someone who understood both architectural structure and artistic nuance. Fortunately, that talent existed within her own family, waiting quietly for the moment when her idea would take shape. And as her imagination expanded, so too did the future of Kimberly Crest, preparing for a transformation that would redefine the estate and anchor its identity not only in its architecture, but in the breathtaking gardens soon to descend the hillside like a living tapestry. Helen did not have to search far for a collaborator capable of translating her vision into reality. Within the Kimberly family itself lived a man whose training, talent, and sensitivity to design made him the ideal partner for such an ambitious project. G. Edwin Bergstrom, her son-in-law. Bergstrom was not merely an architect by profession. He possessed an instinct for interpreting landscapes and understanding how structures could harmonize with their surroundings. His career had already begun to establish him as someone who balanced elegance with purpose, and Helen recognized that his eye for detail, paired with his appreciation for European aesthetics, could transform her dream into something lasting. Their conversations began simply, sketches at the dining table, notes exchanged during morning walks around the property, informal comments about sunlight, slopes, and planting possibilities. Yet those early discussions quickly grew into something more substantial. Helen described the gardens she had seen abroad, the tiered shapes, the interplay of light and stone, the feeling of movement created by terraces layered like steps in a grand visual symphony. Bergstrom listened closely, absorbing not only her ideas but also her emotional connection to what she wanted the hill to become. His role was not just to design, it was to translate her sense of harmony and refinement into architectural form. As he studied Prospect Hill, Bergstrom understood immediately that achieving Helen's vision would require reimagining the entire slope. The raw terrain offered little in the way of natural structure, but it held the potential for transformation. Together, they conceptualized a series of terraced levels descending from the home, each with its own purpose, its own identity, and its own way of interacting with the light and wind. Stone retaining walls would give shape to the earth. Staircases connecting the terraces would guide visitors through the garden like chapters in a narrative. Open landings would offer vistas of the city below, while more intimate sections would create quiet corners where one could pause and reflect. What made their collaboration so effective was the balance between Helen's artistic intuition and Bergstrom's architectural precision. She envisioned emotion. He engineered form. She described how she wanted guests to feel as they moved through the garden. He determined the placement of paths, structures, and steps to evoke exactly those sensations. Their shared goal was not simply to embellish the estate, but to allow the landscape to echo the elegance of the home itself. In their hands, the hill began to feel less like a challenge and more like a sculptural medium waiting for structure. As the plans grew more detailed, it became clear that the project would fundamentally redefine Kimberly Crest. Instead of existing as a beautiful home set against an untouched slope, the estate would become a fusion of architecture and landscape, each element enhancing the other. The forthcoming garden was not conceived as an accessory. It would become one of the estate's defining features, an identity inseparable from the home rising above it. Bergstrom's drawings revealed gracefully curving staircases, structured garden beds, and carefully balanced sightlines that drew the eye outward toward the terraces and inward toward the home in a continuous visual dialogue. Work on the terraces would soon begin, but even before the first stone was placed, the transformation of Kimberly Crest had already started. The estate was no longer a charming seasonal residence. It was becoming a place where artistry and intention converged in a way that few homes of the era could match. Under the combined vision of Helen and her architect son-in-law, the rugged hill had started to shed its rough exterior, preparing to emerge as one of California's most enchanting cultivated landscapes, and the future signature of the Kimberly estate. By 1909, the transformation of Prospect Hill had progressed so dramatically that visitors approaching Kimberly Crest often paused long before reaching the front door. What had once been an unremarkable slope of weathered earth now unfolded in a series of meticulously sculpted terraces that cascaded down the hillside like the steps of an ancient amphitheater. Each terrace served as both an aesthetic statement and a functional piece of the garden's rhythm, creating a landscape that guided the eye and the body on a structured yet deeply poetic journey. The collaboration between Helen Kimberly and G. Edwin Bergstrom had matured into a tangible work of art, one that made the estate feel not simply adorned, but entirely reimagined. The construction of the terraces required extraordinary effort. Stone had to be quarried, cut, and positioned to withstand the challenges of California's shifting temperatures and dry seasons. Yet the result appeared effortless, as though each level had been part of the hillside for centuries. The broad landings were designed to open gently into the next, creating a natural flow from space to space. Visitors moving downward from the house found themselves descending not just stairs, but layers of intention, each terrace revealing a different expression of order, symmetry, and botanical beauty. Staircases formed the spine of the garden. They curved and angled in ways that felt instinctive, inviting guests to wander rather than march. Some sets of steps were framed by stone balustrades, while others felt more like transitions carved directly into the slope. As visitors descended, they encountered statues placed with the care of museum pieces. These sculptural accents acted as silent guardians of the estate, shaping the mood of each terrace and adding a sense of narrative, as if the garden were telling a story without uttering a word. Pergolas draped in flowering vines introduced welcome pockets of shade in the warm California afternoons. Their repeating columns and latticed beams created rhythmic patterns of light and shadow that shifted with the day. Sitting beneath one, visitors could catch glimpses of the mansion above, its turret rising proudly, framed by layers of greenery. These shaded corridors softened the transition between terraces, offering a moment of pause before continuing the journey downward. At the lower levels, the gardens opened into a calm, reflective world where water became the central element. Koi ponds, still and glass-like in the mornings, acted as mirrors for the sky. Even the faintest breeze rippled the water's surface, giving the ponds a sense of living motion. Lily pads floated in lazy patterns, honoring Helen's affection for serene botanical details. The presence of water, scarce and precious in Southern California, transformed the hillside, cooling the air and creating the illusion of a gentler climate. In these moments, one could almost forget that this oasis existed in a region defined by dry summers and bright, unfiltered sunlight. Perhaps the most remarkable achievement of the garden was how convincingly it transported visitors. Though the citrus groves of Redlands spread out in the distance, the structured geometry, terracotta accents, and interplay of stone and greenery evoked the Renaissance gardens of Florence or Verona. The discipline of Italian design blended with California's vibrant plant life to produce an environment that felt familiar and foreign at once, an interpretation of Italy rather than a direct imitation. This fusion gave Kimberly Crest a singular identity, not a replica of Europe, but a Californian dream shaped by European influence. The beauty of the gardens quickly drew attention beyond the immediate community. In 1915, Sunset Magazine, a leading publication dedicated to celebrating life in the American West, published a glowing feature on the estate. The editors described Kimberly Crest as a place where the finest aspects of design, horticulture, and craftsmanship converged. They marveled at the precision of the terraces, the richness of the colors, and the interplay between artistic and natural elements. Their praise captured not just the visual impact of the gardens, but the harmony created by Helen's vision and Bergstrom's architectural expertise. According to the magazine, Kimberly Crest embodied the majesty of perfect lines and demonstrated all the luxury of tone and color that plant life is capable of producing. This recognition elevated the estate from a local treasure to a regional landmark, admired by travelers, garden enthusiasts, and architects alike. Kimberly Crest had become more than a home. It was a testament to what could be achieved when imagination, skill, and dedication converged on a single piece of land. And while the house itself retained the charm of its French-inspired origins, the gardens ensured that its identity would forever be tied to this extraordinary landscape, an Italian dream rooted firmly in California soil. With the terraces complete and the estate now thriving as a harmonious whole, Kimberly Crest entered a new era. The home and gardens, unified in purpose and spirit, became a sanctuary for the Kimberly family, a place where work, community, and personal reflection entwined. But even as the estate reached this remarkable state of beauty, time continued its steady movement forward, preparing to carry the home into the next significant chapter of its evolving story. As the gardens reached their full splendor and Kimberly Crest settled into its identity as a unified estate, John Alfred Kimberly found himself increasingly drawn to the quiet rhythm of life on Prospect Hill. For decades, his world had revolved around the rapid expansion of Kimberly-Clark, a company that grew from a modest 2-ton-per-day mill into a vast industrial enterprise producing paper goods that would one day become household staples across America. Yet in his later years, the pace of industry no longer defined him as completely as it once had. Instead, the hillside home, with its terraces and softly echoing hallways, became the environment where he could reflect on a lifetime of work, family, and accomplishment. Even as age advanced, John's dedication to the company remained unwavering. His continued leadership was not born of necessity, but of an enduring sense of responsibility. He had shaped the company from its earliest days, guided it through expansion and innovation, and maintained a steady hand through challenges that would have discouraged many. Remaining president until the age of 89 was not a display of stubbornness. It was a reflection of how deeply intertwined his identity was with the enterprise he helped create. Kimberly Clark was, in many ways, an extension of his own values, discipline, foresight, and a commitment to progress. Stepping away entirely would have felt like abandoning a part of himself. Yet the contrast between the industrial world he oversaw and the serene refuge he returned to in Redlands grew sharper each year. In California, he could experience something the mills could never offer: quiet mornings bathed in gentle sunlight, afternoons spent walking through the terraced gardens with the scent of citrus and warm stone rising from below, and evenings shared with Helen in the comfort of rooms shaped by their combined vision. Kimberly Crest had become more than a seasonal escape. It was a personal sanctuary where John could engage with life at a different tempo. The home provided space for contemplation, allowing him to weigh decisions with clarity and reconnect with the part of himself that existed beyond ledgers, production charts, and corporate responsibilities. As his physical energy began to wane, the house seemed to respond. It cradled him in familiarity, the carved staircase he had climbed so many times, the library where he had read letters and company reports, the conservatory where sunlight filtered through glass panes in warm, steady patterns. The estate had grown into a living reflection of his journey, ambition balanced by tranquility, achievement softened by the grace of his surroundings. While the world associated his name with industrial success, here he felt something quieter and more profound, a sense of belonging that no boardroom could replicate. When his long life reached its final chapter, it did so at Kimberly Crest, the place where his work and personal world had finally found equilibrium. The home did not merely host his last years, it absorbed them, becoming a keeper of his presence long after he was gone. Guests who visited the estate after his passing often remarked that certain rooms still carried an atmosphere shaped by him, a sense of order, purpose, and calm that lingered in the woodwork and the light that moved across the floors. With John's journey complete, the estate entered a moment of transition. The house that had welcomed him in the prime of his success and supported him through the gentle closing of his life now shifted its attention toward the future. Helen, deeply connected to the home and its gardens, remained its guiding spirit, but the loss of her lifelong companion altered the balance of the estate, setting the stage for changes that would eventually transform Kimberly Crest from a private family refuge into a treasure meant to be shared with the public. In the years that followed John's departure, Kimberly Crest remained a place shaped by memory and quiet continuity. The gardens still unfurled down the hillside in their elegant terraces, and the sunlight still filtered through the conservatory just as it always had. Yet within the house, the atmosphere shifted in subtle ways. Without John's steady presence, the estate leaned more heavily into the gentle influence of Helen, who had long been the home's emotional center. Her affection for beauty, learning, and harmony was reflected in every corner, from the flower porch where she arranged seasonal blossoms to the pathways she had envisioned winding through the gardens. Kimberly Crest felt unmistakably hers, a place that carried her touch in both grand and delicate gestures. But time continued its quiet progression, and soon the estate faced another profound change. When Helen's long life reached its peaceful conclusion, the home experienced a stillness unlike any it had known before. Her absence settled over the rooms like a soft veil. The house she had filled with light, conversation, and artistic intention now held those echoes in suspension. Kimberly Crest did not feel empty. Instead, it felt paused, as though the structure itself understood it had reached the end of a defining chapter. The carved staircase, the patterned walls, the conservatory washed in morning brightness, all seemed to hold their breath, preserving the atmosphere of the era she had shaped. For the community of Redlands and for those who had grown familiar with the Kimberly's presence, Helen's departure marked the closing of a remarkable period in the estate's history. She and John had transformed a charming hillside home into a symbol of refinement and generosity. The house had witnessed their shared aspirations, their traditions, and their unwavering commitment to creating something meaningful. And now, with both figures gone, Kimberly Crest stood as a testament to their vision, a physical embodiment of a life's work that blended industry, culture, and profound appreciation for artistry. Yet, even in this moment of quiet, the house was not lost to time. Its future rested with someone who understood its significance intimately, the Kimberly's youngest daughter, Mary. For her, the estate was not simply an inheritance. It was the environment in which she had grown, a place that held the essence of her parents' values and dreams. She recognized the weight of responsibility that came with such a legacy. The question that now emerged was not whether Kimberly Crest would endure, but how it would continue, and under whose care it would flourish in the next stage of its life. The house had already survived the passing of its creators. Now it prepared to follow a new vision, one shaped not by industry or horticulture, but by a desire to share the estate with the world beyond its gates. As the chapter defined by John and Helen concluded, another began to unfold, a chapter guided by Mary's determination to honor her family's legacy while ensuring the home would remain a living part of Redlands for generations still to come. When Mary Kimberly Shirk stepped into her new role as steward of Kimberly Crest, she did so with a deep understanding of what the estate represented. She had grown up surrounded by the quiet elegance of the terraced gardens, the warm wood interiors, and the atmosphere shaped by her parents' values. For her, the house was not a distant ancestral property, but a living environment infused with memories, traditions, and carefully nurtured beauty. Yet, unlike her parents, who had shaped the estate as a private sanctuary, Mary saw its potential as something more expansive. She understood that Kimberly Crest had matured into a landmark not just for her family, but for the entire community that had watched it evolve over decades. As she settled into life at the estate, Mary began inviting local groups, civic organizations, and charitable circles to use the home and its gardens as a setting for their events. These gatherings were not merely social occasions. They were purposeful, often supporting causes that aligned with the community's needs. On the terraces where her mother once envisioned quiet contemplation, guests now mingled during garden tours, fundraising teas, and cultural programs. The grand main hall, once the scene of intimate family winter evenings, now welcomed neighbors, philanthropists, and visitors who arrived eager to experience the refined atmosphere of the estate. For Mary, opening the home to charitable activities was not a departure from tradition, but an extension of it. Her parents had built lives defined by service, through education initiatives, civic leadership, and generosity. And Mary saw Kimberly Crest as a place where that spirit could continue. Under her guidance, the estate evolved into something dynamic and responsive, a home that supported the arts, community projects, and organizations seeking meaningful venues for their work. The estate's beauty no longer belonged solely to those who lived within its walls. It now became a shared resource, adding depth and richness to the city's cultural fabric. As more events took place, Kimberly Crest grew into a recognizable gathering point in Redlands. Guests walked the terraced gardens during spring fundraisers, pausing by the koi ponds to take in their reflections. Others attended lectures or intimate concerts inside the house, where the acoustics of wood-paneled rooms enhanced every note and spoken word. Weddings, receptions, and seasonal celebrations all contributed to the new life of the estate, demonstrating how adaptable the historic home could be while still maintaining the dignity and character that defined its architecture. Through all this activity, Mary carried an unspoken awareness of the estate's vulnerability. She understood that while the house and gardens could offer joy and inspiration, they also required constant care. Stone pathways needed restoration, gardens needed tending, and the house itself demanded ongoing attention to preserve its structural integrity. Mary's connection to Kimberly Crest was emotional, but it was also practical. She saw how time expressed itself in the slow fading of wood finishes, the settling of foundations, and the quiet wear of years. She realized that no matter how active and beloved the estate became, it remained fragile, dependent on someone willing to protect it. And so, beneath her generosity toward the community, a more profound mission slowly came into focus. Mary began to contemplate the estate's long-term future, recognizing that her own stewardship, no matter how devoted, could not sustain Kimberly Crest forever. The question that guided her thoughts was not whether the house should continue, but how it could endure beyond her lifetime. She believed deeply that the estate's beauty, its gardens, and its layers of history deserved permanence, a form of preservation that would ensure Kimberly Crest remained a cherished landmark rather than a fading memory. As her vision sharpened, it became clear that Mary was preparing for a transformation far more significant than hosting social gatherings. She was preparing to shift the estate from private ownership to a legacy entrusted to the people of Redlands. The home that had once been her family's retreat was now poised to enter a new era, one defined not by a single household, but by the entire community that had come to love and depend on its presence. By the early 1960s, Mary Kimberly Shirk had spent decades watching Kimberly Crest evolve into a cultural touchstone for Redlands. The estate had become a gathering place, a source of pride, and a living testament to her family's long-standing commitment to community enrichment. Yet Mary also understood a truth that lay beneath the surface of every event, every fundraiser, every garden tour. Without a long-term plan, the estate's future was uncertain. Kimberly Crest required not only affection, but also stewardship, structure, and financial stability strong enough to outlast any individual caretaker. It needed a framework that would protect it from the quiet erosion of time, and from the possibility of being sold into private hands once she could no longer defend it. By 1963, Mary had come to a decision that was as bold as it was visionary. She approached the city of Redlands with a proposal that startled even those who knew her well. Her offer was not a simple donation, nor an informal suggestion. It was a challenge, clear, demanding, and infused with a sense of urgency. Mary proposed that if the city and its residents could raise enough funds to purchase the vast 39 acres surrounding Kimberly Crest, she would, in return, give the house and its immediate grounds to the people of Redlands. The estate that had defined her family's presence in California for nearly 7 decades would no longer be a private sanctuary. It would become a public treasure. This was not a symbolic gesture. The land in question was substantial, occupying much of the hillside, and forming the natural buffer that preserved the estate's character. Without it, future development could easily encroach upon the gardens, altering the view, the atmosphere, or even the viability of the historic property. Mary's challenge was designed to ensure that Kimberly Crest would remain intact, architecturally, historically, and environmentally. If the city succeeded, the home would not merely be preserved, it would be integrated into the heart of Redlands' civic identity. The proposition electrified the community. Some saw it as an extraordinary opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime chance to claim a cultural landmark for future generations. Others worried about the scale of the fundraising effort, questioning whether it was realistic to gather such a significant sum in a relatively short period. But beneath the debates and discussions ran a deeper theme, the recognition that this moment would determine the trajectory of Kimberly Crest forever. If the challenge failed, the estate could face an uncertain fate. If it succeeded, Redlands would inherit not just a house, but a symbol of continuity and pride. Newspaper columns began to chronicle the unfolding effort. Local organizations held meetings. Civic leaders rallied volunteers and residents, many of whom had attended events at the estate or walked its garden paths, donated whatever they could. Schools, clubs, and businesses joined the campaign. Even those who had never stepped foot inside Kimberly Crest recognized the value of preserving something so deeply entwined with the city's history. Every dollar raised carried a sense of participation in something larger than individual contribution, a communal act of guardianship. Mary watched these developments quietly, with a mixture of hope and resolve. She understood the magnitude of what she was asking, but she also believed firmly in Redlands' ability to rise to the occasion. Her challenge was not born of doubt, but of faith. Faith that the community cared enough to protect the estate that had shaped so much of its cultural landscape. As the fundraising campaigns intensified, a sense of momentum grew. Redlands was no longer simply responding to Mary's proposition. It was embracing it. The city began to imagine what Kimberly Crest could become: a public garden, an educational resource, a museum, a gathering place rooted in history yet open to the future. The community was not merely raising money, it was reclaiming a part of itself, and so began a race against time, one that carried the weight of a century of memories and the promise of a new chapter yet to be written. The challenge had been set, the goal was clear, and the future of Kimberly Crest hung in the balance, awaiting the moment when the city would determine whether the estate's story would remain private or become a legacy shared by all. As the fundraising effort gained momentum, the city of Redlands found itself swept into a wave of collective purpose, unlike anything it had experienced before. What began as a daunting challenge slowly transformed into a movement that united residents across neighborhoods, professions, and generations. Contributions came from unexpected places, local businesses hosting benefit events, school children gathering coins in decorated jars, civic groups organizing luncheons in church halls, and longtime families quietly sending checks accompanied by handwritten notes describing their own memories of Kimberly Crest. Each donation, no matter how modest, carried a sense of pride. The people of Redlands were not simply raising money. They were proving that a community could rally to protect its heritage. Town meetings frequently filled to capacity as updates on the fundraising totals were announced. Enthusiasm grew with every milestone reached. The newspapers printed progress bars in bold ink, allowing residents to track the campaign's ascent as though they were witnessing a public marathon. Conversations in grocery stores and post office lines often drifted toward the same topic. How close are we now? It felt as if the estate atop Prospect Hill had always belonged to the entire city, and Mary's challenge merely offered an opportunity for everyone to affirm what they already believed, that Kimberly Crest was woven into Redlands' identity, and its preservation was a shared responsibility. Months of dedication finally culminated in a moment of celebration. The city had succeeded. Redlands raised the money needed to purchase the surrounding 39 acres, securing the open land that framed the estate and protected its sweeping vistas. This land was soon designated as Prospect Park, a public green space that would serve as both a buffer for the historic property and a sanctuary for residents seeking quiet walks among citrus trees, gentle slopes, and natural California landscapes. The park's creation transformed the entire hillside into a community asset, ensuring that the setting of Kimberly Crest would remain unspoiled by development or encroaching structures. With the land secured, Mary fulfilled her promise. She formalized the arrangement to donate Kimberly Crest and its immediate grounds to the people of Redlands. It was an act of generosity that few could fully grasp in the moment, though most understood that this was no ordinary gift. It was the release of a family's legacy into the hands of the community, a gesture of trust that symbolized both gratitude and continuity. For Mary, this decision was not bittersweet, it was purposeful. She believed the estate could only achieve its fullest meaning if it became something larger than a private residence, a shared space, a cultural beacon, a place where history could live openly rather than behind closed doors. Her remaining years at the estate were spent quietly, surrounded by the familiar rooms and the gardens that carried her mother's touch. She oversaw the early steps that would support the future transformation of the estate, ensuring that all would be in order when the time came for the transition. And when her long life reached its gentle conclusion in 1979, she left behind not only memories and stories, but a carefully structured plan. In her will, she entrusted Kimberly Crest to the people of Redlands, honoring the commitment she had made years earlier. The proceeds from the sale of the Prospect Park land were used to establish the Kimberly Shirk Association, a non-profit dedicated to maintaining the estate and guiding its role as a public landmark. Her passing marked the end of an era, yet, in another sense, it opened a door. The estate was no longer a private home. It was a gift permanently linked to public life. The city now carried the responsibility and the privilege of sustaining a property that had witnessed generations of personal and community history. The mansion, with its turret rising above the gardens and its rooms filled with Victorian artistry, was poised to take on a new purpose. As caretakers began preparing the house for its next chapter, a quiet anticipation settled over the estate. Kimberly Crest had survived beginnings, expansions, transformations, and the passing of its most devoted stewards. Now, For the first time, it was ready to live openly, allowing thousands of new visitors to step inside, retrace its history, and see for themselves the world the Kimberly family had shaped across nearly a century. The stage was set for the home's rebirth, not as a private retreat, but as a museum, a cultural landmark, and a cherished public treasure. Before Kimberly Crest officially opened its doors as a museum, it entered a curious and unexpected chapter, one shaped not by family life or community events, but by the world of film, music, and storytelling. The estate, with its turreted silhouette, dramatic staircases, and atmospheric gardens, possessed a visual presence that seemed almost made for the screen. Its European-inspired architecture stood out sharply against the Californian landscape, giving it an aura that could shift effortlessly, from elegant to mysterious to haunting, depending on how the camera approached it. Directors and cinematographers noticed. So did location scouts searching for places that carried both beauty and a touch of the unreal. And so, for a time, Kimberly Crest became not just a historic home, but a backdrop for cinematic imagination. One of the most prominent productions to use the estate was the 1981 film Hell Night, starring Linda Blair. The movie, set in a Gothic mansion filled with tension, secretive atmosphere, and whispered legends, found an almost uncanny match in Kimberly Crest's architecture. Its turret resembled something out of an old-world tale, and the gardens, when filmed at night or in shadow, offered enough pathways, arches, and terraces to suggest hidden stories. Although the film depicted a network of underground tunnels running beneath the property, the reality was much simpler and far less sinister. No such tunnels existed. The scenes that suggested labyrinthine passages were created on studio sets, relying on the estate's mood rather than its actual structure. Still, the rumors persisted long after the cameras stopped rolling, adding an unintended layer of myth to the home's reputation. The house's cinematic allure did not end with horror. Its romantic charm drew the attention of the music world as well, most notably when Fleetwood Mac chose the grounds as the setting for their Big Love music video. In contrast to the eerie atmosphere of Hell Night, the video highlighted the estate's elegance, sunlit terraces, the symmetry of its gardens, and the dramatic lines of the house rising behind the performers. Where some productions leaned into the estate's mysterious qualities, Fleetwood Mac celebrated its visual poetry. Soft shadows moved across the stonework, and the architecture seemed to resonate with the rhythm of the song. The result was a portrayal that introduced the house to an entirely different audience, one that appreciated the estate not for suspense, but for beauty. These forays into film and music created a surprising side effect. Kimberly Crest developed a reputation among filmmakers as a location capable of transformation. It could be stately or haunting, idyllic or dramatic. Its gardens offered natural framing for sweeping shots, and its exterior details, arched windows, carved balconies, and the iconic turret, gave directors endless angles to work with. The estate became a kind of visual chameleon, able to support narratives without ever losing its own identity. For cinematographers, this versatility made the property irresistible, a single location that could evoke the aura of Europe, the mystery of folklore, or the charm of a classical estate. Yet, for all the creativity these productions brought to the estate, the heart of Kimberly Crest remained unchanged. Beneath the fictional narratives woven around it, the home still carried the truth of its origins, its gardens shaped by Helen's vision, its architecture defined by Cornelia Hill's ambition, and its legacy safeguarded by Mary Kimberly Shirk. Each film crew eventually departed, taking their props, scripts, and fabricated legends with them. What remained was the house itself, steadfast and familiar, untouched by the illusions projected onto it. As the transition toward museum status approached, the estate's cinematic chapter began to fade gently into the background. The home's true purpose, its role as a guardian of history, a place where stories were preserved rather than invented, came back into focus. Kimberly Crest had proven it could play many characters, but its most important role was the one it had always held: a keeper of heritage, a vessel of memory, and a testament to the lives of those who built, shaped, and protected it. The cameras had captured its silhouette, but now the house was ready to reveal its real story to the public, inviting visitors not into fiction, but into the genuine history that had defined it for more than a century. When Kimberly Crest finally opened as a museum in 1981, the moment felt less like a debut and more like a home exhaling after decades of preparing for its new life. The estate had been shaped by the dreams of Cornelia Hill, elevated by the vision of Helen Kimberly, safeguarded by the devotion of Mary Kimberly Shirk, and now, at last, it belonged fully to the public. The rooms that once echoed with private conversations, family gatherings, and personal milestones now welcomed footsteps of visitors eager to experience the world these women and their families had built. For the first time, the estate became a place where history could be walked through, touched, and understood not through stories alone, but through physical presence. The Kimberly Shirk Association, established through Mary's thoughtful planning, immediately became the heartbeat of the estate's continuing preservation. Its members approached the home not as curators of an artifact, but as caretakers of a living legacy. They ensured that the interior rooms remained arranged as they were when the Kimberleys lived there, woodwork polished, wallpaper restored, and personal items carefully maintained so that the atmosphere felt authentic, not staged. Each object, each window pane, each carved detail contributed to the feeling that the family had simply stepped outside for a moment and might return at any time. The association's work extended beyond maintenance. It included education, outreach, and a commitment to welcoming anyone who arrived curious about the estate's story. Visitors quickly came in large numbers, drawn by a combination of architectural beauty, cultural significance, and the enchantment of the gardens that had become the estate's signature. Walking tours guided guests through rooms illuminated by stained glass and warmed by the mellow glow of Victorian craftsmanship. As guides described the lives of the home's former owners, guests moved through spaces that felt untouched by the rush of modern time. The staircases creaked softly underfoot, the conservatory glowed in the afternoon sun, and the library's shelves still held the quiet dignity of a family devoted to learning and refinement. Outside, the gardens continued to thrive much as Helen had envisioned them decades earlier. Volunteers and horticultural experts tended the terraces, keeping the hedges trimmed, the pathways clear, and the flowering plants refreshed with seasonal color. The koi ponds, now maintained with assistance from the Inland Koi Society, remained serene focal points where visitors paused to watch the gentle movement of bright fish gliding beneath lily pads. The pergolas still cast patterned shadows across the walkways, creating pockets of calm and shade as guests moved from one terrace to another. The entire hillside functioned like a living museum, breathing out beauty with each sunrise and absorbing the changing colors of every season. Kimberly Crest also embraced its role as a place for personal milestones. Weddings held on the terraces became memories etched into the lives of couples who believed the estate offered something no banquet hall or modern venue could match: a sense of timelessness, a feeling of stepping into a story much larger than their own. Families gathered for anniversary celebrations under the pergolas. Photographers captured portraits framed by arches and greenery, and schoolchildren arrived on field trips to learn about history, not from textbooks, but from the environment around them. Every visitor added another layer to the ongoing narrative of the estate, ensuring that its life extended far beyond the stories of its original residents. Today, the estate stands as a testament to endurance, not only of architecture and landscape, but of vision, ingenuity, and community devotion. Kimberly Crest has lived many lives, each shaped by those who loved it. Cornelia's aspirations, Helen's artistry, John's reflective presence, Mary's generosity, and the community's determination to preserve it. The home has outlasted its owners, its original era, and the fleeting illusions of its cinematic roles, yet it has never grown outdated or irrelevant. Instead, it remains vibrant, meaningful, and deeply rooted in the cultural identity of Redlands. Its turret still rises proudly above the city, catching the late afternoon sun. Its gardens still spill down the hillside in terraces of green geometry, and its rooms still whisper stories to anyone willing to listen, stories of ambition, artistry, generosity, and an enduring belief that beauty deserves protection. Kimberly Crest continues to live, not as a relic, but as a place that invites exploration. It waits for new visitors to walk its paths, step into its hallways, and feel the presence of the lives that shaped it. And for anyone who has yet to see it, The estate extends a quiet promise. The moment you stand before its turreted facade and look across its gardens, you will understand why generations have fought to protect it and why it remains one of California's most enchanting historic treasures.